You may have noticed that there's an extra person on the panel that you haven't seen before. Unfortunately, due to GDPR, I can't reveal any of her personal details. But if she'd like to mention who she is, I think we'd all appreciate it.
Do you have a consent form first?
I never have consent. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Hi all, my name is Nadja van der Veer. I'm the co-founder of PaymentCounsel and managing partner at Pitch Ventures, which is a legal consultancy and a strategic consultancy firm. I've been working in the industry for over 8 years, working for PSP and acquirers, and now have been running my own business for 4 years.
Thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Okay, so I've already got a set of questions that were sent in earlier on, so I think I probably want to get the discussion going at a more general level before we dive down into the individual questions. So I want to start off with a couple of high-level questions. So 1 or 2 people have asked questions which essentially boil down to the same thing, which is that, do you feel, as participants in the market from different perspectives, do you feel that there's a danger that payments is being a little over-regulated at the moment? Perhaps some sort of regulatory holiday for 2 to 10, perhaps 15 years would benefit everybody here? Or do you feel that the payments market is not functioning properly and needs further regulation? Who would like to? We're all friends here. You can say your honest opinions, please. Are we over-regulated, or is the market just not functioning properly, please?
Thanks, David. I'm happy to start. So I think whilst a lot of this, and I think everyone would agree that from any regulation, we can at least extract some parts which are relevant and which will surely, as you say, help to shape the future of the payments market in a positive way. I think it's a very valid question because we're still undergoing a review of IFR. It hasn't happened. We're going into PSD2.
What is the deadline for the IFR review? It's soon, isn't it?
The initial deadline was June. So a publication was to take place by June this year.
It's June the 9th, right?
Yeah, June the 9th. It's a big question. I mean, will it happen?
I learned from lawyers, so you never ask a question you don't already know the answer to. It's basic legal training. So June the 9th. So are they going to make June the 9th?
I don't know. I think we have to ask the gentleman from EI who's supporting them. But I know that the initial requirements were extremely challenging to meet for any consultancy taking up the project. The thresholds of the amount of responses that were required from issuers, acquirers, merchants in each European market were just so high that it was a fundamental question: is anyone really able to get the data in such a short time frame for the European Commission? So that's the one piece. The other thing is we're going into PSD2. SCA is coming in September. Everyone's all over it. We've got GDPR just behind us and everyone adapting to the new way of working and handling data. You know, what's the next thing that's going to happen? So I do think there's a tendency that a lot of things are coming in at once and not letting merchants really see the benefits of many of these, or trying to learn from them slowly, step by step, while still focusing on their business. It seems that a lot of it has just been dumped, be it by chance or whatever, in an extremely short time frame on the industry.
And this is not good, right? Because this takes people's focus away from building better products and services.
Yeah, well, and to add to that, let's also not forget the EBA mandates. There were also 6 technical standards issued, 5 guidelines. It doesn't just stop with PSD2.
So I should just have people in the audience. When Nadja says standards, she doesn't mean standards in the sense that you or I think of the word standards, right? They're kind of more sort of aspirational guidelines. They're not technical standards, really.
Yeah, but they are kind of binding.
Yeah, they're binding aspirational guidelines for the, yeah.
No, so I think if I go, I mean, apart from IFR, if I look at PSD2, I think the intention was very good. The struggle with legislation is always the path. PSD2 draft text came about in 2013. It took 5 years. The payment landscape is not what it is anymore 5 years ago. So they're always going to be, you know, a step. It's always a step too late. You know, with the EBA mandates, I truly question whether or not we kind of have stepped away from the whole intention of PSD2, which was supposed to be about giving access and a consumer control over their own data and determining, you know, from a customer perspective, if they want to have, you know, a better experience and aggregated data at the same time. But now we're looking at these mandates that are screwing up the whole market.
Do you feel, this is a very naughty question to ask a lawyer, but because I've got Ian on the panel as well, so I'm curious. But do you think that PSD2 and GDPR are entirely harmonious? I mean, do you think that perhaps PSD2, they have some conflicting elements to them?
They are conflicting, yes, but I also think that...
so like in a fight, would PSD2 beat GDPR, or how does the... no, but how does it work in the who trumps?
Well, I think it really depends on who the party is that is concerned. I think that the conflicting aspects, if you look at it just from a practical perspective and the way how you want to run your business and what you need to comply with, I think the answers are there. You can get your answer without GDPR and PSD2 conflicting. But it really depends upon your point of view.
Is this your practical experience, Ian?
Yeah, so essentially, the GDPR is a global standard now. It's not just an EU standard, because all of our businesses are fairly global. So we have to think about it more global. So it's just the stronger of that part of the regulation should prevail in my eyes. Right. And when we look at this, I think, you know, from a merchant and a payment card system, there's been a lot of regulatory change and there's lots coming through. But the level of risk and harm is high. I mean, this is our money. You know, we're making payments. We see things in the news where we have fraudulent activity taken out against our cards. Some people can't afford that level of fraud. We are then personally compromised by some of this.
Right.
If I may also maybe come in, I mean, I'm not, as I said earlier, I'm not a regulator. I don't come from the regulatory
You're an expert,
but as a public
different.
institution, I think, I mean, maybe we take a step back. What was the objective of PSD2? I mean, that was on the one hand enhancing competition, and on the other hand increasing securities. Now we have, let's say, third-party providers which have to be regulated entities, which I think is a legitimate request. If they handle your payment data, you may want to make sure that these are entities which cannot just disappear like this, but have a license, are authorized to do so, and you have a certain level of trust in that. Whether, and I fully agree, we have moved on, and innovation is happening very quickly. But let's say the objective, at least I would say, is applaudable, because in the end, I agree, I mean, it's a high-risk business, and let's say if you take the gaps that we have seen in misuse of data, Cambridge Analytics, I don't know if something like this would have happened in the payment sphere, there would have been a huge uproar and people would have immediately gone to the regulator, why didn't you not do something against that? So, I mean, this is a little bit, I mean, the context where we are. Now, I fully agree that, I mean, the market is moving so quickly that it may be a more conducive way also to try to foster more agile solutions where the market in itself can find a solution. That's actually what we try also to promote. For example, currently we are discussing, or the EBA is discussing the implementation, and together with the European Commission, they're very engaged in implementing PSD2. We already start looking a step further, because we say APIs, which should be the means of access, a standard API, as it is enshrined in the PSD2, is a bit unclear, but and it's regulated, but it may not serve all the user needs, and we should do.
I'm not an absolute expert on PSD2. I'm sure there are people in the room that are, but I don't think PSD2 actually mentions APIs.
No, exactly.
Anywhere, does it?
Exactly. It does not, but I think that is what people now consider as the standard upon which we should emerge. So I mean, there has been interpretation that, let's say, you should have well-designed APIs functioning. Otherwise, I mean, in order to get an exemption, I mean, they must function well. But I think there's consensus by now that APIs are the way to go to access accounts.
So is there an optimistic view here then which says, actually, it doesn't actually matter if interchange regulation and card scheme, it doesn't matter if these things are all wrong, because actually the correct solution to a market failure in this area is to reduce the entry costs until the market rents approach the marginal costs of production, in which case the use of instant payments and PSD2 and open banking and so on will solve the problem for us. If that two-sided market is, you know, distorted, then you'll have these three-party schemes springing up around open banking, right? So is the situation just going to solve itself?
Oh, that was one for me, sorry.
Yes or no is fine.
Well, ultimately, yes.
Okay, good.
Ultimately, yes. Once that must-take element is removed from card payments, meaning that merchants can fundamentally decide, are we going to take cards or instant payments or any other rails because they've been taken up by consumers, then there would be no need. The market would be able to regulate itself.
So Helmut's point about the original purpose being to increase competition, actually right now that looks as if that bit might work, that we actually will get some more of that competition. That's very positive.
Well,
okay.
If I may challenge that a little.
We're not going to get that competition.
I think we should also not neglect the power of the card schemes as it is. I think some of the consultants that I've spoken to when PSD2 came about is that they said, you know, this is meant to bother the card schemes, you know. However, if you look at the payment method and its functionalities, and the chargeback capabilities makes it so attractive still for customers to choose that option. Just to give you an example, today, Adyen, they announced that they're doing payment initiation services and they're starting with KLM. Me as a customer, I would still always pay with my credit card with an airline. So I would not even take it.
Of course, because that's because you know how payments work. But the public don't know how payments work, so
well, I would assume that the public by now knows that a credit card is a guaranteed payment to get your money back, right? Or is that a false assumption?
I'm not sure the public are that bright, to be honest, Nadja. It's just...
Well, I guess, I mean, that's your constituency here.
These aren't the public. These are people who understand how payments work. So
payments, I mean, me, if I'm a consumer, I would agree, I don't care. In case of doubt, I would go for a credit card because I earn a few miles.
Of course.
So, I mean...
And thanks to the ridiculous ban on card surcharging.
Who pay the bill, there's no free lunch.
Yeah.
So
no, it is a free lunch. Because I use my Amex card to buy British Airways flights, which would have cost me £4.50 or £5 or something, and now it's free because of bans on card surcharging. So poor people with debit cards have to subsidise my frequent flyer miles. I think it's a great solution. I don't understand why it's EU policy, but it's a great solution. So
we could technically surcharge your card, because an Amex is a non-regulated.
Well, sadly, not in the UK, because our idiotic version of the EU's idiotic scheme is even more idiotic. So in the UK, there's a ban on you can't surcharge Amex, PayPal, anything else as well. Ours is even more ridiculous, so even better for me. Okay, so let's go to some more audience questions. Oh, just one more question about the competition, because I said it as if I was joking at the beginning, but I'm not joking about it. If PSD2 turns out to provide too much competitive energy, if you like, in the form of data, to internet giants that we need not name at this point, is there a danger that the Commission will have replaced what it sees as the anti-competitive? They're not. The benevolent and the guiding hand of the international payment schemes is not being questioned here, but the Commission probably saw them as being sort of dominant, and replacing them with Facebook and Google doesn't really help us, does it, very much? So PSD2 can't be the long-term solution, can it?
No, I mean, I think that, PSD2 is well intended, but with the years, we need to fix a few things. So we can probably await a PSD3.
And the people in this room need to get their act together about lobbying properly about these kind of things, because that's how you get stuff done. Sitting around moaning about it in the pub like I do is not the route. You need to organize and lobby and make these points known at a higher level. Right, let's go to some audience questions. Instant payments. We all love instant payments. We all think it's fantastic. What can we do to make this international? How could other, I mean, are you talking to other advanced, Singapore and Kenya and places like that?
Well, there are. I mean, this is a global trend.
Yeah.
I mean, that's clear. I think this is one of the payment instruments where we in Europe are also at the forefront. We are discussing that with with other central banks in the US. I mean, they are a little bit, I would say, behind, but they are also.
They use checks. So.
Yeah, no. I mean.
A little behind.
Yeah, but this is clearly a trend which is coming. Let's say to link instant payments across jurisdictions is certainly a challenge. I mean, I've seen the question there whether cross-border that could be possible in other jurisdictions. Technically, it can. The question is whether there would be an appetite to do though.
You would also need final settlement in some form of. You need settlement finality across borders.
Exactly. You need to have the same legislative framework that the SFD, or let's say at least in the SCT Inst, settlement finality builds on the European legislation. You need to have equivalents then in other jurisdictions in order to make that work, so that you don't have risks.
We could use Bitcoin for that, right?
Well, I mean, if you want to gamble,
because it's instant and free. I read it on the internet.
I'm not sure what Bitcoin would help, but I mean, we were talking about gambling. I mean, in this other presentation, that's I think a good example for that. But if we speak about payments, I'm not sure that's
a great
the right topic. But I mean, as said, I mean, you need legal certainty. Then on both sides, I would say, in a long term, I think this is what we probably will see, but that certainly will take still a while. I mean, first, we speak about rolling out instant in Europe, in certain countries. I mean, it's emerging, and to have that on a global scale interoperable, I mean, that's going to be some kind of a challenge.
Let's take a couple of questions about consumer protection. I can see there's a couple of questions here from a known communist troublemaker talking about the transition to instant payments. So these questions about consumers in instant payments, you touched on it briefly just now. What actually has to happen for consumers to really understand what this transition means? There are a great many cases. I bought a car a couple of weeks ago using instant payments. It was fantastic. I sent the guy the £10. I turned up. I checked the car. It's fine. I sent in the rest. As a consumer, this is a fantastic service. But I understand when I should be using Section 75 chargeback, when I should be using reward schemes, when I should be. What has to happen to educate the public about this? It seems to me like we haven't really thought about that bit yet. Is there some program to teach people about PSD2 and so on, or some sort of comic, perhaps with pictures, or?
Well, I think that's the duty of banks. I mean, to inform their customers about the products that they're offering. And as I said earlier, that's of course the dilemma in which some of the banks are, because frankly speaking, I guess in order not to hurt their cards' revenues, they rather leave these products aside, which I fear is a short-sighted approach, because I mean other banks are more aggressive in that, and once the customers have moved, I mean maybe older people stick with their banks, but the younger people, they will go where they get the service that they want. And once these customers are gone, they are gone. So
let me ask a slightly more aggressive form of that question then. So what happens when all over Europe, people lose money because they send money to fraudsters in the Ukraine, the Ukraine was just if there's anybody from Ukraine here, that wasn't it was just a random example, I apologize. So people send money and it goes to some unnamed Eastern European country, and then they go and complain to because they'll complain to the regulators, and then there'll be a demand for consumer protection regulation in the instant payment space, which we already have in the card space, right? So we had people like IATA yesterday saying, well, these schemes are going to be much cheaper because they don't have these protections. But that's a temporary window, isn't it? Because surely these schemes, as it says, surely these schemes will have to have some form of consumer protection, right?
Yeah, I think it all stands and falls with the consumer's trust in the basic payment mean, and in my opinion, you need to cater for an infrastructure that allows host-to-host encryption. Therefore, if you, as a payer, for example, scan a QR code, you can be sure that the money ends up where it's supposed to be and not somewhere in the middle. And that's also a reason why I believe it's truly important that different players come together and look at a proper standardized proposal. So I would echo what you mentioned earlier during your presentation. And to respond to your question that you raised earlier, how can we make sure that instant payments get picked up? I think it's already happening as we speak. We see a lot of different local solutions popping up everywhere in Europe. I think we've had presentations throughout these 2 days by multiple people showing the map of Europe with, Swish in Sweden and Vips in Norway, and then you have Payconic in Belgium and so on and so forth. So these are all potential players out there in the market that could just, switch a lever and start processing their payments on SCT Inst.
Those could be interconnected through tips, those existing schemes?
Well, I mean, these schemes, they are different, they are clearing arrangements. Tips is a settlement arrangement.
Yeah.
So you cannot interconnect them. I mean, tips will only process bank to bank, not clearinghouse to clearinghouse. So that's...
but a bank in the UK could take Swish payments and then feed them through tips or claim them through tips?
Not really.
Okay.
I mean, let's say as I said earlier, the precondition for participation in tips is you need to have a target account.
Right.
Let's say the bank in the UK probably wants to make a pound sterling payment. The Swedish bank would make a krona payment. They could, if the Bank of England and the Riksbank were to agree to hold their accounts on the TIPS platform, then you could exchange it over there. But that's the prerequisite in order.
That sounds complicated.
Well, I mean, it's a choice that they will have to hold the account somewhere. The question is where they do that. It's just a technical platform.
It's all pointing towards Bitcoin, if you ask me. Okay, so...
if I may come back to the original question on consumer protection and raising awareness, I actually think that is a task for government and regulator, and not to leave that up to the banks, especially with the risks involved and the commercial position, like you just handed out, the interest that banks have, for instance, in cards. And to give an example there, if I look at PSD2, the communication to the market, to consumers, we were already talking about PSD2 in our environments, at our conferences for many years, but consumers did only learn about it a few months ago.
Have we learned anything from consumer education about GDPR that could inform this discussion?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I don't think that was the greatest sort of education until something went wrong. So then people know what their rights are. I mean, there were organizations out there that were trying to explain the rights of the consumer and did a quite effective job. I think the challenge is a lot of people still didn't understand how to implement their regulations. So we probably all received a raft of consent-based emails on May the 25th, 6th, 7th, and 8th.
Well, you get it on every single website you go to now. You have to click I accept.
Well, that's a different regulation again. So that's so that's the e-privacy directive that's not quite fully formed yet. But that's
even I don't understand it.
So that's the do you accept the cookies? And by the way, there's all these organizations tracking all of your click history to make sure that they can pop adverts up in milliseconds. That's a whole different section. But essentially, we have to have consent, and we receipt consent like a credit card transaction. So there's a commonality here. The educational piece some people took, but even the 3 days before the regulation went live, you've all received emails saying, please click here to consent to everything. And we all know that consent can't be to everything. So again, organizations still didn't understand that. These were big organizations.
Okay, so I don't think PSD2 can learn anything from that at the moment then. But there's elements of that, like there was a discussion yesterday about SCA, because September the, 19th or something, we have to start using SCA. And in the UK newspapers, that just shows up as, I'm not making this up by this, it's in one of the UK newspapers, because of Brussels, you have to have your mobile phone whenever you want to buy anything online. That's how SCA shows up to the general public. So we're not learning anything on that either. So somehow, I mean, you say it's the job of regulators, but isn't it the job of the industry to do something a little better on this? I mean, shouldn't the industry itself be coming together to do this?
Yeah, but they all have their own commercial interest. I mean, if you look at the Dutch news, how PSD2 was introduced, consumers were frightened. They were like, oh, those bad TPPs, they're going to misuse your data, because the banks were lobbying pretty well in the Netherlands. I mean, I don't think that anyone with a commercial interest should really be the educator of the consumer, truly.
These people have an intellectual commitment to competition and education, so I think we're at a better starting point with that. Let's go to another question from here. So let's talk about PSD3. So I think the first mention of PSD3 came at about 9:01 this morning. It was Gator Boscovich. People have already started to say, well, perhaps we really need to start thinking about the PSD review, which is in 2 years, is it, or 3 years? 2021. So we have the PSD2 review coming in 2021, which will lead to a PSD3. You guys are informed market participants who study these kind of things. Can you give a few suggestions to the audience what might be in PSD3 or you know, where they should start lobbying to have improvements in PSD3 from your perspectives? What would PSD3 contain?
I would hope that it would open up the market further, going truly to open banking in the way that it should be, so not minimizing access to the account to a defined set of payment accounts held with credit institutions.
Do you think anybody should be able to look at people's bank account data?
No,
that doesn't sound very GDPR compliant.
No, exactly.
No, so I'm not saying on that side, I'm saying on the definition of payment account and what falls under it. I think that part needs to be fixed, because in the UK you have a different interpretation of what a payment account is. In the Netherlands you have a different interpretation. So there's going to be a fragmentation about if I decide as a consumer that I want to open up and have an app that shows all my accounts, it will be dependent on in which country I sit to which accounts I will get access.
Is that true?
Yes.
Oh God, it's worse than I thought.
In
Okay.
the FC
Well, that's a very practical suggestion then, thank you. Some more practical suggestions for PSD3, guys.
Well, I mean, I think there's a chance to avoid PSD3 because, I mean, that's actually what I mentioned earlier. We try to tackle exactly that problem, that PSD2 is limited, and I think particularly for account information services, that is a sincere limitation, that you have only payments accounts. And that's what we try to bring together now under the ERBB working group on SEPA API access scheme, whether we can agree within the market what is needed in order to make a decent service to the benefit of the user. So, I mean, if the market can agree on, I mean, and here we have the two opponents at the table, TPPs and the banks, outside the context of PSD2, and I can understand the position of the banks that they were not keen on extending the scope because they have, under PSD2, they have to give everything for free towards their competitors. I mean, nobody can be convinced about committing suicide. So therefore, I mean, we try now to bring them at the table against, I would say, commercial interests, so that they can also be it charge for it, be it have other economic incentives, but at least offer these services for a certain provision. And I think if the market manages to come to a consensus, I would think that there is little reason to go for PSD3. The market can organize itself in a way that the market functions well. There's little reason for the regulator to step in and say, okay, but then let's enshrine that in regulation. You always, for a regulation, you have to have a merits and cost analysis. And I mean, if there is a solution which is consensual in the market, it's difficult probably to come to a positive outcome for a merits and cost analysis. So therefore, I think there is a reasonable chance that this can be overcome if the market is successful in organizing itself.
So is there some kind of interchange model imaginable where the use of the basic APIs, payment instruction and so on, has to be free because of, but the banks could offer other services through those APIs that they could reasonably charge for?
That's exactly
that
what
doesn't
we're
sound
working
crazy.
towards.
That sounds reasonable.
Yeah, that's exactly what we are working towards. I mean,
Right,
PSD2 clearly defines the scope where banks have to offer certain information as defined in PSD2 at no cost. That is insufficient for the market, and that's what the debate has been in, I would say, the last couple of months when they tried to see how PSD2 should be interpreted. So that's why we try to see what makes sense to create a user experience which makes sense so that AIS and PIS can offer services that are conducive for their users, and where banks then, for additional premium services, may also charge, be it in terms of reciprocity of data sharing, for example, be it in terms of charging economic...
Well, because I've heard this brought up for sort of shared KYC and things like that, and it seems like a reasonable solution that banks will share that data. What about from a merchant perspective? What do merchants want to see in PSD3?
I think I'm sharing your point of view here as well, because I think it's a bit too premature to make such an assessment. I think the market hasn't really unfolded itself after the introduction of PSD2. So I think maybe it's a bit too early stage to really say, okay, we need PSD3 after the revision. I think looking at the objective of PSD2 to begin with, creating innovation and bringing legal certainty of these formerly unregulated players, I think we're on a very, very good way. So I think I'm somewhat confident that in the near future, with also the SCA regulation or the RTS in place, we'll see market participants actually being forced to scale up their innovation in order to meet these requirements, and I think that's a positive aspect of it.
Do you think all the big merchants will become PISPs?
No.
You think they'll leave it? There'll still be a business for the acquirers out there?
Yes, either acquirers or just completely new market entrants, whether it's big American tech companies or small local companies. I think it's an exciting field, but surely there will be merchants who will seize the opportunity as well and give it a chance.
Ian, what are you hearing out in the marketplace? What needs changing?
It's hard for me to say because obviously my regulation comes from a different aspect.
Yeah. But you're very focused on the security side of things.
We've spent years trying to make the ability to pay for anything easier. So overhauling the regulation that goes behind that to make sure that we have the confidence in the way that we spend money and communicate those transactions has got to be the right way forward.
Confidence is a good word because that has to be central to the ECB's goals as well, doesn't it? Yes, we all want the exciting new payment system, but we also want a stable and secure payment system. So, there is a little bit of a conflict there. Well, look, listen, everybody. I want you to join me in thanking our panel because I have to tell you, these people are real experts who brought real market knowledge onto the stage. They did not know any of the questions they were going to be asked, and they gave you honest opinions from an expert perspective, and I greatly appreciated that, and I hope that you do too. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.